Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents Xi Jinping, the most powerful man in the world, by Stefan Aust and Adrian Geiges. Narrated by Peter Noble. Seek truth from facts is a phrase from the Han Shu, a history of China dating to the 1st century. The phrase was deployed by Mao Zedong, the founder of the People's Republic, and later invoked by Deng Xiaoping in justifying his reform agenda. Today it is therefore often ascribed to Deng. Seek truth from facts was also our guiding principle in writing this book about today's Chinese leader, Xi Jinping. We have no political agenda. The book has not been influenced by the Chinese government's point of view, but nor do we engage in any sort of China bashing, that vague accusation often leveled at critical accounts of the Communist Party of China. We are not interested in presenting a partisan perspective on Xi Jinping, whether for or against. As far as possible, we have sought to portray him as he is. Our account is based on his speeches, biographical sources, his political activities, and our own interviews and reports. We leave it to our listeners to form their own opinions about the most powerful man in the world. Especially in the English-speaking world, we often came across people who doubted whether Xi Jinping was in fact the most powerful world leader. Our response was always the same. Who else could it be? For a long time, the US president was seen as the most powerful world leader. But the current president, Joe Biden, governs a deeply divided country. He is not even able to pass a law that would counteract restrictions on voting that disadvantage his Democratic Party. And the Supreme Court has a very clear conservative majority. It is true that the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was not subject to a separation of powers. But the Soviet Union was, in the words of Helmut Schmidt, West Germany's chancellor at the time, upper Volta with nuclear missiles, a huge military power, but an economically insignificant one. That is still true of today's Russia, and it rules out Vladimir Putin as a candidate for most powerful man on earth. Russia's economic output is no more than twice that of Switzerland, despite having a population 17 times larger. In military terms, the US is still superior to China, but this does not mean much. In the age of nuclear weapons, the US is unlikely to make full use of its military capabilities. Wars are also unpopular in the US. Even the poorly equipped Taliban fighters were able to force the Americans out of Afghanistan. What counts in today's world is economic power. In terms of purchasing power, China overtook the US in 2014. China's infrastructure is world-leading, that of the US and other Western countries, often disastrous. The COVID-19 pandemic has weakened the US and Europe, but China has emerged from it more powerful than ever. Given its rates of growth, the question of China's GDP overtaking that of the US is a matter of when, not if, even though US politicians do not dare utter this simple truth. And Xi Jinping is making targeted use of his economic power, so that countries and global corporations will toe China's line in the future, as this book will demonstrate. Developments since the German publication of this book have confirmed our claims. After Taiwan opened a representative office in Lithuania, Chinese customs authorities deleted the Baltic state from their database, blocking the import of products from anywhere in the world if they contain anything produced in Lithuania. We have also found ourselves on the receiving end of Xi Jinping's power. For our previous books on China, we had held events at Germany's various Confucius institutes, organizations that are jointly run by Chinese universities and universities in host countries. We had wanted to do the same with Xi Jinping, the most powerful man on earth. At the institutes in Leipzig and Freiburg, we encountered no problems at all. But a few days before an online event hosted by the Confucius Institutes in Hanover and Duisburg-Essen, the managing directors rang us. They were clearly shocked. Their Chinese partner universities had come under pressure from the very top, and they had to cancel the event. It apparently did not matter that the Chinese partner universities had explicitly approved the readings. Their German counterparts had sent them key passages from the book and a translated summary. The head of the Chinese mission in Düsseldorf, Feng Haiyang, had intervened personally to prevent the event from taking place. The issue was not the content of our book, the managing director of one of the institutes told us. Rather, as she summarized the objections coming from the Chinese side, you can no longer talk about Xi Jinping the way you talk about any ordinary person. He is meant to be untouchable and non-negotiable from now on. It seems, then, that the personality cult around Xi Jinping will be enforced worldwide. Whether Xi himself is responsible for this, or whether it is a result of the anticipatory obedience of overzealous officials, the result remains the same. 1. Who cares if a sack of rice falls over in China? Since the emergence of COVID-19, we know that we all should. It is 30th December 2019. At the Central Hospital of Wuhan, the physician Ai Fen, director of the emergency department, opens a letter from the Capital Bio Laboratory in Beijing. The letter contains an eagerly awaited report. In recent weeks, there have been several cases of patients with mysterious fevers and pulmonary problems that have not responded to the usual treatments. Now, Ai Fen has one patient's test results in front of her. Reading it, she shudders. SARS coronavirus. She circles the two words with a red pen, takes a photo of the page with her mobile phone, and sends the picture to the other doctors in the hospital. I broke out into a cold sweat, she would later remember. The SARS pandemic of 2002-4 had killed 774 people across the globe. Might this be as bad? Ai Fen immediately calls on her colleagues to take precautionary measures and informs the health authorities. In other words, she does what she considers her duty as a doctor. Far from being thanked for this, however, she is summoned to appear before the hospital's disciplinary committee. How dare you ignore party discipline and spread rumor? The chair of the committee shouts at her. Ai Fen is forced to agree to ask the 200 colleagues she texted to keep the information secret. She is supposed to meet each one individually or contact them on the phone, but under no circumstances is she to write to them or use the online chat group, lest further traces of the event be created. You must not even tell your husband. She obeys. All she says to him that evening is, "Should something happen to me, take care of our child." Their child is only a year old. It will be weeks before her husband fully understands what Ai Fen was talking about. Today, Ai Fen asks herself how many lives could have been saved in Wuhan, in China, and all over the world if she had not complied. And yet her actions did ensure that the news got out. One of the recipients of her warning was Li Wenliang, an ophthalmologist working on the 3rd floor of the hospital. Li had kept in touch with 7 of his former fellow students on WeChat, the Chinese equivalent of WhatsApp, and had passed on the information to the group. 7 people is not many, but it was enough to spur the Chinese government into action. Not, however, action to combat the virus. Li Wenliang and his friends were summoned to the police station. Little in China escapes internet censorship. The annual meeting of Hubei Province's People's Congress is soon to take place in Wuhan, and the authorities want to make sure the high-profile event is not marred by bad news. The group of 7 have to agree to a cease and desist declaration, with their fingerprints recorded in red ink at the bottom of the page. The policeman in charge of the interrogation tells them, "We are warning you, if you do not let go of this, if you maintain this insolence and continue to take part in illegal activities, the law will punish you." Dr. Li Wenliang is anything but a dissident. His white doctor's coat sports the badge of the Communist Party, the hammer and sickle against a red background. On his blog, he rails against the protests in Hong Kong. In the following weeks, the new coronavirus spreads freely, thanks to Li Wenliang, among others. The fact that an unusual illness is circulating in Wuhan has not been kept secret, but the line from official Chinese media organizations is that the virus is controllable and containable. The official story is that bats are the likely source of the virus, and that the virus is not transmissible from human to human. China's ruling Communist Party does not want to spoil the mood ahead of the Chinese New Year. A banquet for 40,000 families is due to take place in Wuhan on 20th January 2020. The banquet will turn out to be the super-spreader event that transforms a few isolated cases in a hospital into a pandemic. It goes ahead, even though on the very same day, 20th January, China's leading lung specialist, Zhong Nanshan, declares for the first time in public that the new virus is, in fact, transmissible from human to human, and 14 medical staff in Wuhan are already infected. 3 days later, in the early hours of 23rd January, the Chinese government hermetically seals off Wuhan, a city with a population larger than those of Berlin, Hamburg, Munich, and Cologne combined. The date of the Chinese New Year is based on the lunar calendar. In 2020, it fell on 25th January. But by that time, no one in Wuhan was in a mood to celebrate. Because the local hospitals couldn't cope with the surge of new patients, the entire system was brought to the brink of collapse, writes Fang Fang, the city's most famous writer. As it happens, that was precisely the period of the Chinese New Year when families normally come together for the holiday. It is a time of year that is usually filled with joy. But instead, the world froze over. Countless people became infected with the coronavirus, and they ended up traipsing all over the city in the wind and rain, searching in vain for treatment. People had to walk. Because of the lockdown, there was no public transport, and most people in Wuhan do not own cars. What did the president know, and when did he know it? This is a question you often hear in the US, but it could also be asked of China's president, Xi Jinping. As Xi tells it, he presented a paper entitled Requirements for Prevention and Control of the New Coronavirus to the Politburo Standing Committee as early as 7th January. But while most of his speeches are published, this one was not. All we know from sources close to the party leadership is that Xi Jinping requested that the festive atmosphere in the run-up to the Chinese New Year should not be disturbed. As the core of the whole party, his official epithet, Xi Jinping is untouchable in China. It is therefore highly unlikely that the real answer to the "how much did he know" question will be known until he is toppled or dies. There is all the more reason to find out now what makes the man who has been president of the People's Republic of China since 2013 tick. Even more important than being president is the fact that since 2012 he has also been General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party. he leads the party, and in China, the party is above the state. China's population of 1.4 billion is significantly larger than those of the European Union, the US, and Russia taken together. In terms of gross domestic product and purchasing power, the country is already the largest national economy in the world, having overtaken the US in 2014. This is a major step forward. The US had been the world's leading economy since 1872. Our knowledge of China and its president has not kept pace with these developments. This is revealed by seemingly trivial details. For instance, on one of the two German state broadcasters, the ARD, the presenter of Börse vor 8, the stock markets today, Markus Görner, who is also the economics editor of Hessischer Rundfunk, responsible for stock market news, innocently referred on primetime television to the Chinese president, Xi Jinping. In Chinese, as incidentally in a number of other languages, the family name comes first. Thus, he is Xi, just as Mao is the family name of Mao Zedong. Calling the Chinese president Xi Jinping is therefore like referring to the American President Joe or the German Chancellor Angela. Xi Jinping's decisions have a direct effect on our lives, no matter whether the effects are positive or negative. Any lingering doubts about that fact have now been dispelled by the COVID-19 pandemic. It has cost the lives of several million people from virtually every country in the world, plunged the global economy into its deepest crisis since 1929, and destroyed the livelihoods and dreams of countless people. A German idiom used as a retort to something one finds utterly insignificant is, "Who cares if a sack of rice falls over in China?" Today, if China sneezes, the whole world catches a cold. The first people who caught COVID-19 in Wuhan were those working or shopping at the Huanan seafood market. As the Chinese say, this sort of market sells everything that can swim and is not a ship, everything that has 4 legs and is not a table, and everything that can fly and is not an aeroplane. In other words, it sells not just seafood, but crocodiles, dogs, bamboo rats, and bats. Though because of COVID-19, the Chinese Ministry of Agriculture intends to take dogs and bats off the list of edible animals. The Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention, WHCDC, is located only 300 meters away from the market. The fact that the center's laboratories also carry out work on bats has led to the theory that infected animals may have found their way from the lab to the market, and that the virus might even have emerged from experiments carried out at the WHCDC. Alternatively, an employee might have become infected accidentally and then brought the virus to the market. I consider this very unlikely, says the virologist Christian Drosten, head of the Institute of Virology at the Charité in Berlin, and, since the outbreak of the pandemic, a German celebrity more famous than most pop stars. Chinese laboratories work the same way as we do, with safety workbenches where cell cultures are kept in certain areas, and from these work areas no air can escape. And even if some air did escape, let's assume that there is an accident. People are still wearing respirator hoods, and only breathe in air from the laboratory that has been filtered, and where no virus can get through. We should keep in mind, though, that Drosten is a virologist, not a sinologist, and therefore is not necessarily familiar with the sometimes relaxed attitude towards rules in China. There is another laboratory, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that carries out far more advanced research and deals with more dangerous materials than the WHCDC. But it is located far outside the city center, 14 kilometers away from the Huanan seafood market. In 2017, the renowned scientific journal Nature wrote, "A laboratory in Wuhan is on the cusp of being cleared to work with the world's most dangerous pathogens. Some scientists outside China worry about pathogens escaping and the addition of a biological dimension to geopolitical tensions between China and other nations. But Chinese microbiologists are celebrating their entrance to the elite cadre empowered to wrestle with the world's greatest biological threats." The institute was the first laboratory in China to work at the highest biosafety level, BSL-4, Biosafety Level 4, a fact that has further fueled suspicions that something might have gone wrong. The Nature article quotes Tim Trevin, the founder of Chrome Biosafety and Biosecurity, a company based in the U.S. state of Maryland, as saying that an open culture is important for keeping BSL-4 labs safe. Trevin wonders how such a culture could be achieved in China, a society that emphasizes hierarchy. Diversity of viewpoint, flat structures where everyone feels free to speak up, and openness of information are important, he says. Nature later updated the article with an editor's note, first in January 2020, and then again in March 2020. The note now says, "We are aware that this story is being used as the basis for unverified theories that the novel coronavirus causing COVID-19 was engineered. There is no evidence that this is true. Scientists believe that an animal is the most likely source of the coronavirus." On Twitter, the spokesperson for the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Zhao Lijian, suggested another theory. It might be U.S. Army who brought the epidemic to Wuhan. American soldiers had taken part in the military World Games in Wuhan between 18th and 27th October 2019. On 17th April 2020, the Chinese government stated that there had been 3,896 deaths from COVID-19 in Wuhan. One of the victims was Li Wenliang, the doctor who had been courageous enough to pass on the information about the new coronavirus. He was only 33 years old and left behind a child and a pregnant wife. The Communist Party, of which he had been a member, posthumously declared him a martyr. Had the party learned from its mistakes? Just a few days before he died, Li Wenliang had said, "A healthy society should accept more than one voice." Had the party taken Li's remarks on board? In the interview from which we quoted earlier, Ai Fen, the director of the emergency department at the Central Hospital of Wuhan, describes how the coronavirus outbreak was covered up. In China, the interview was published online on 10th March 2020 by the journal Rennu, Personality, but within 3 hours it was taken down by the authorities. Being familiar with such suppression tactics, many Chinese internet users had taken screenshots of the article and posted them on social media. To throw off the detection technology used by the censors, they modified the images, for example by adding emojis. In her Wuhan diary, Fang Fang says, "Deeply ingrained habitual behaviors, like reporting the good news while hiding the bad, preventing people from speaking the truth, forbidding the public from understanding the true nature of events, and expressing a disdain for individual lives, have led to massive reprisals against our society, untold injuries against our people." In China, Fang Fang's book has only been published online and has been repeatedly censored. "I'm not sure if I'll be able to send anything out through my Weibo account. It wasn't too long ago that I had my account shut down. I tried to complain to Sina, the company that runs Weibo, yet there is really no way to get through to them, never mind file a complaint." Fang Fang is not a dissident. She avoids any criticism of the all-powerful Xi Jinping. Her novels tell the stories of ordinary people, and that has made her a well-known figure in China. She was chairperson of the Hubei Provincial Writers Association, which gave her a certain degree of protection. However, she has frequently been attacked on the internet by fanatical communists. She calls them left-wing extremists, often using obscene or misogynist language. Even though the official mission of the censors is to keep the internet clean, they delete her considered contributions, but not the insults directed against her. The censorship authorities are much tougher on ordinary Chinese citizens. For instance, following the outbreak of the virus, the Wuhan businessman Fang Bin, no relation, began to film the new reality of everyday life in his city and upload the videos to the internet from his mobile phone. They show overcrowded hospitals, with dozens of people surrounding reception desks, desperately seeking help. With no more space on the wards, patients lie on gurneys in the corridors. People can be heard sobbing and screaming. Fang Bin asks a young woman who is staring at her mother how the mother is doing. "She is already dead," she says. In a minibus outside a hospital, he spots several of the deceased in body bags. His last video shows 5 policemen attempting to enter his flat. They want to ask him a few questions. Since 9th February 2020, nothing has been seen or heard of Fang Bin. Others who posted videos, for example the lawyer Chen Chuxi, have also disappeared without a trace. Coronation is a documentary by the artist Ai Weiwei, made using material recorded for him by residents of Wuhan. From loudspeakers in front of a crematorium, one hears the following announcement. Family members of the deceased with resident identity card numbers beginning 420111 and 420105, please come to Tianshao Hall and queue up for the formalities. Dozens of relatives sit in a long row on plastic chairs. If the leaders of Wuhan had closed down the city earlier, there would not be so many lost souls walking around, a young woman complains. If a father or mother dies, the life of the children is ruined. They are left behind and are alone. My father-in-law did not need to die. The government's mismanagement killed him. There are many cases like ours here. Some who died could not even be tested. They may not even have been counted as COVID victims. They simply died. That is the painful experience we have had. We were not allowed to say our goodbyes to our relatives. When we brought them to the entrance of the quarantine area, we did not know that this would be the last time we would see them. My father-in-law must have been very much in despair when he died. For our generation, those who lived through the pandemic, this will stay as a shadow darkening our hearts forever. With the relatives looking on, crematorium employees compress the bags containing the ashes of the dead, 1 bag for each, until they fit into the decorated wooden boxes which take the place of urns here. One employee wraps a red cloth around the box and hands it over to the relatives. The film's first scene is a view of Wuhan's central train station from the air, shot by drone. High-speed trains, much more modern than German intercity trains, are parked, unable to operate out of the sealed-off city. When we flew from Hamburg to London in September 2020 to visit Ai Weiwei, it was as though we were in a remake of his film. There were just 1 or 2 passengers in the front and rear rows of the Eurowings aircraft. The rows in the middle section were completely empty. After disembarking at Heathrow Airport, we walked through silent corridors where there was hardly a soul to be seen. In this last respect, the reality in Europe differs from that depicted in Coronation. The film also contains a scene from an airport, Wuhan's, where, as in Heathrow, everyone is wearing a face mask. But in Wuhan, there are plenty of people.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?